We also want to thank everybody who brought some food and cooking hot dogs, making things happen. We thank Ms. Fitzpatrick for all the organization and for setting up and really the connection today. I just realized that John Sexton was a freshman when I was a senior at Brooklyn Prep. All right, okay. And he knew to keep in line there, all right? I'm sure he's a Dodger fan. He doesn't want to know anything about the Red Sox, they hear. Okay, so we don't have anything about that. I told my own students it's a good thing the Bayonne Bridge was closed after the Dodgers lost to the Astros, okay? But just a couple of things. People probably have seen the book, Baseball as a Road to God. And John Sexton can tell you much more than I would. But we thank Mike Duran, who made the flyers for us. And just a little bibliography of John Sexton. Obviously, the author of Baseball as a Road to God, Seeing Beyond the Game. Served as president of NYU from 2002 to 15. Chair of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, 2003 to 7. Dean of the NYU School of Law, 88 to 2002. Holds an advanced degree in religion from Fordham University. Fordham Chair of the Religion Department at St. Francis College in Brooklyn. Also a member of the Brooklyn Prep class of 1959. I graduated in 56 after the Dodgers beat the Yankees in 55. There was nothing else. My world was made, so become a Jesuit, okay, after all. Certainly I mentioned to John and to Peter, certainly here. Underneath there, it also says Peter Schwartz, okay, as helping to write the book. And mentioned to John about 35, 40 minutes of sharing, and then some questions, and then certainly plenty of food afterwards. Some people may still come in because of the traffic, et cetera. Election day. Those in Hudson County, they have to vote a few times, all right? So that's right. Okay, so certainly happy and really, it's a great pleasure. I'm a big baseball person myself, and reading the introduction, reading some of the comments that people have written about the book. We had a young fellow who died last year, Dan Cooney, who played baseball. Mr. Howens is here. His own son had died previous year. But Dan Cooney, we used it at a prayer service of the idea of coming home. And Dan came home, and the idea of certainly a baseball coming home, not getting picked off second, et cetera. So John Sexton, here we are.
So thank you all for coming out on the rainy night. I'm here, I should say, because Father Tony, when he first raised this with me, which is several years ago, it's taking us a few years to work it out on my calendar, not because I didn't want to come, but because, for example, as I was saying to some of you just a few moments ago, just day before yesterday, I was meeting with a group of students that I teach every 2 weeks, halfway around the world in Abu Dhabi. I fly over there for a day every 2 weeks to teach, and my office tries to keep everything kind of balanced so that my life and my family are at the center of things. So sometimes, even though I want to come, it takes a while to work it out. But when Father Tony first contacted me, he used those two magic words, Brooklyn Prep. And was nothing. I was president of NYU for 14 years and dean of its law school for 14 years before that. And you could probably Google speeches I've given on higher education, some of them in pretty fancy places. And I always say that, for me, the greatest educators in the world are the Jesuits. I was lucky enough to get that Brooklyn Prep education, and then that was followed by a Fordham BA and then a Fordham PhD. And then, and there's some truth to this, you can bring it up if you want, in the question and answer. I'm not going to go off on an orthogonal angle here to tell you the full story, but I'll give you a taster. If Fordham had accepted me for law school, I would have gone to Fordham, because I wanted to go to school in New York City, but Fordham and NYU, where later I became dean, both rejected me. Harvard was the only school that accepted me. So I had to go. And it was very useful later when I became dean of NYU's law school and graduates would come in and say, "You just rejected my daughter. How could you have done that?" And I said, "They rejected me. Why shouldn't they reject your daughter?" But I've said far and wide. I've said it in the presence of Augustinians, Vincentians, atheists, secularists, that the Jesuits are the greatest educators in the world. And God bless them. They shaped me. And I just finished my latest book, which is an examination of the role of universities in the world that's unfolding, a world where I'm afraid, frankly, that thought is dying. People around the world have developed an allergy to nuance and complexity. They can't get past a paragraph of thinking. If ever you pick up that book, it's not going to be out now for another year or so, but if ever you pick it up, it's going to be titled Standing to Reason. You'll see the opening chapter of that book explains the role of the Jesuits and Father Teilhard de Chardin and Pope John the 23rd. And in fact, I refer to the moment in which we're living as a choice for the world, which was the same choice that we were confronted with. So let me start there, and you'll see, I think, the connection to baseball as a road to God. And after I talk for about a half an hour, we'll open it up for questions. And since I have a law degree and a PhD in religion, and I've written this book, you can ask me a question on virtually anything. You can ask me what justice is. You can ask me whether there's a God. You can ask me who's going to win the World Series. I can tell you all of those things with equal accuracy. The great thing about law school is that I learned very quickly the first two words of every answer on every exam were the same. And those were, "It depends." And every good lawyer knows those are the first two words of every legal problem that you think about. So, Brooklyn Prep, start there. If you want, later I'll tell you the story of one of the greatest days in the history of humankind. And on this I know I have the imprimatur. It was October the 4th, 1955, which is the only time in the history of the world that the Brooklyn Dodgers will win the World Series. And the book opens with the story of my best friend and I on that day. And when that ground ball went to Pee Wee Reese, who threw it to Gil Hodges, there was a moment of perfection in the world that was so great the world had really seen nothing quite like it for 2,000 years. Now, in my latest book, and this didn't come to me until I was almost done, and I was I was beginning to write the final chapter where I was pulling my argument, which was about a 300-page argument, together. And I was inspired to go and do the research on the cover, the front page of the Daily News, which then had over 1 million circulation every day, on October the 8th, 1957. And there actually are two headlines on the cover. It's interesting to go back in time this way. Two headlines on the cover. One of them spoke to one of the moments when this confident, maybe too confident, maybe too hubristic nation, America, saw a little bit of a glimmer of relief from the humiliation it had suffered. The headline was, "Sputnik is falling." The Russian satellite that had been circumvented, which began, John Kennedy hadn't yet given his speech in his inauguration. This is when America was not a space power and Russia was. What a blow that was to those of us who were of that generation that had just won the World War and was wondering about this thing called Korea, which is still with us. So Sputnik is falling. That was the smaller of the two headlines. Screaming above it was the headline, "The bums are leaving." And this man, Walter O'Malley, my friend Pete Hamill tells the story about a lunch between him and Jimmy Breslin. These are two people that are kind of synecdoches for New York, right? They can understand this accent, right? And they're at lunch one day, and Breslin turns to Pete and says, "Pete, you're in a room, you got a gun and 2 bullets, and you got Hitler, Stalin, and O'Malley. How do you use the bullets?" And Pete says, "It's clear. You shoot O'Malley twice." So bracketed in between those two dates, October the 4th, 1955, that date of glory, and October the 8th, 1957, the date when it all began. I gave, the other thing he said in the email, besides that he was from Brooklyn Prep, and he said it just beautifully. He didn't say, "I hope your fee is low." He said, "I hope your fee is not too high." And I wrote back and I said, "Is 0 low enough?" Turns out markets work. And since I don't charge ever to speak, I can curate, where I can speak. And it's not, trust me, it's not always on baseball as a road to God. If you want to see probably my most recent serious speech, just Google John Sexton and Supreme Court Historical Society, because last June I gave the annual Supreme Court Historical Society lecture, which is given in the courtroom with the justices present, and 2 of them were my students, and John Roberts and I were classmates, and I wanted to talk to them about the Supreme Court and its role these days. That was nervous making for me. Now I know I'm with friends, you see. But I gave the presidential lecture at a Jesuit, they know to put Jesuit in the opening sentence, a Jesuit university, St. Louis University, about 20 years ago. And I said, I started off with that date, October the 8th, 1957. And I said, that was the beginning of it all. Once the Dodgers left Brooklyn, it was inevitable that Americans would learn not to trust their institutions. It was only a matter of time. The assassinations, the Vietnam War, Watergate, our death of our faith in our leaders are religious and political, corporate, whatever, inevitable once the Dodgers could leave Brooklyn. Because if that institution could not be trusted, and I was only being half facetious, because the last 50 years have witnessed that development of a culture of distrust. The most recent polling says 85% of Americans don't trust their neighbors. Now think about that. All right, so I've been tiptoeing up to this a few times. I'm now to that Brooklyn Prep classroom in between those two dates. And a man, the young among you won't know, but you should go home and Google tonight, okay? A great Jesuit priest by the name of Daniel Berrigan, B-E-R-R-I-G-A-N. And Danny Berrigan was teaching at Brooklyn Prep. I don't know whether he was there. Yeah, taught you senior year, taught me sophomore year. And now Danny Berrigan, for those of you that don't remember, was a leader in the 1960s of the anti-war movement. He and his brother Philip, they were both priests. Danny was the smarter because he was a Jesuit. And Father Berrigan is there in class, and he writes on the blackboard 4 Latin words: extra ecclesia nulla salus. Outside the church, there's no salvation. And I went up to him after class and I said, Father Berrigan, does that mean that my best friend, Jerry Epstein, won't go to heaven? And Danny Berrigan said to me, if you don't baptize him, he will not go to heaven. That is what we believed. That is what he believed. This was religious triumphalism that would make any jihadist proud. Okay? Think of that. You know, we were talking about how I met my Lisa, and we were married within 2 months, and we were more in love every day until she died. Lisa was Jewish. And I guarantee you, whatever place there is for me in heaven, she's got a higher place. And it took, we were just at the pivot point, Father Tony. We were just at the pivot point. I was a protege of the great Charlie Winans. You were not taught by Charlie, but Charlie Winans was a layperson. The only layperson the Jesuits have ever allowed into Murray Weigel Hall, okay, which is where the older Jesuits go. And I remember going up and convincing the provincial general that this man, though not a Jesuit, had given his life to teaching, never married. It was all about his students. And he had arrived. He was a mystic. He had a PhD in English from Columbia, but he had arrived, and the Jesuits didn't know what to do with him. Bill O'Malley, a Jesuit priest who died last year, because I've been very involved with the Murray Weigel community, Bill O'Malley once wrote about Charlie that he had the body of Orson Welles, the voice of James Earl Jones, and the soul of St. Francis of Assisi. Now, most of you in the room are not old enough to remember this, but in the 50s, there was no such thing as sex education. In fact, you weren't even allowed to say the word sex. You had to spell it. It was one of the ways you could lose eternity. And even to think about it could lose you eternity. It was a serious matter. You had to make sure you didn't eat meat on Friday. You had to make sure you got the Mass on Sunday, even if you stood in the sidewalk outside of church, as long as you were touching someone who was touching someone who was touching someone who was in. And then you had to avoid even thinking about sex. Okay? And then pretty much if you wanted to lock the deal, you made 9 First Fridays, and you were guaranteed a peaceful and happy death with a priest by your side. It was a very simple world where only members of the Catholic Church could be saved. And in came Charlie, and the Jesuits didn't know what to do with him. And they took 12 of us. The Jesuits have never been afraid to make choices. You know, so the 12 of us were chosen through some revelation, and we were put in a special honors class, and for 3 years, 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning, every morning, 5 days a week, we got Charlie for a course they just called Charlie. And we had no idea what it was. You're given it. You didn't have any choices or electives or anything like that. You were given it. We show up at 9 o'clock, and this guy walks in, and he looks almost exactly. He's only about 30, 35 years of age, but he looks exactly like Colonel Sanders of Kentucky Fried Chicken. He had premature white hair. He's a big man, and he walks in, and the first words he says to us, because we're wondering, he says, "Where's the coach?" I don't want to. So he looks at us. He says, "Boys," because he had that voice. "Boys, on the first date." We're saying, "Holy cow, this is it. We've hit the jackpot. This is what would later be called sex education." He's talking about a date. But then he writes, "On the first date, find out her SAT score." He says, "Beauty fades, but the need for conversation never will." What a great message, right? I mean, he had us. What a great message. That's why, Coach, the first thing I asked Sandy was, is he worthy of you? Because by and large, we are not worthy of them. They're just superior creatures. But that's another thing you can ask me about in the question and answer. In any case, he went on to go with us up through the centuries, starting with percussion music and the cave paintings at Altamara, and coming up, this is before anybody in the world ever used the word multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. And he did for 3 years simultaneously history, literature, art, and music, starting with the earliest of times right up to the 1950s. And it was just, it was mind-changing. Now remember, this is set against extra ecclesia nulla salus. This is street kids in Brooklyn, who came by subway, not from Manhattan. In fact, going to Manhattan, we used to call going to the city. And it was a big deal. And we, by and large, didn't do it. And if we went to any museum, it would be the Brooklyn Museum. Or if we saw any concert, well, I didn't see any concerts. I didn't eat in a restaurant until Charlie piled 18 of us into his Oldsmobile. I was one of the 4 in the trunk to drive over to Greenwich Village to a restaurant named Felix's on 13th Street where the waiters sang opera between the courses. And when I went to my second restaurant, where I was out at a restaurant and the waiters didn't sing, I thought there was something wrong. So he just expanded our world. And I just give you one more vignette. And if you're wondering, how does all this connect to baseball as a road to God? It does. And if any of you have read the book, you can probably see it coming. But probably in our junior year, he had the pyramids of Giza on the wall. He always had slides that he would show in an old slide machine. So the pyramids of Giza on the wall, and we were listening to Egyptian music, and we had read the Book of the Dead and the Shakespearean play, and we had studied the history. All of this going on at once, right? And he looks at the pyramids, points to them and says, "Boys, you will never see these pyramids because you can't drive to them." We couldn't get on a plane or a boat and go to Egypt. Then he added, "But boys, there are pyramids south of here, and you can drive to them. And they were built by a great civilization. You just haven't heard about them because the goddamn British didn't rob these pyramids for their museums." So there he was in 1958, talking about Eurocentrism and the Elgin marbles, and he was so far ahead, but he got us, his phrase was, think strange. And he gave us a mantra, which was play another octave of the piano. Play another octave of the piano. If there are notes you haven't touched, if there's a food you haven't tasted, if there's a music you haven't heard, if there's a place you can get to that you haven't been, whether it's the bottom of the Grand Canyon or a waterfall someplace, or get to it. Appreciate God's creation in all of its breadth. Play another octave of the piano. And ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you this. If you walk onto the campuses of NYU Abu Dhabi or NYU Shanghai, 100%, as long as I was president of NYU, I don't know now, I think now, but if you pick a student at random, 40%. If you said to them, who created this odd structure of NYU with campuses around the world and students circulate among them to take a semester in Accra or Prague or Buenos Aires, they'll say Charlie. Because I've done nothing but play out his ideas, which will go back to Jesuit education. So there came a moment in 1998. We were in NYU's campus in Florence, which is a 55-acre villa in the city of Florence, not out where the farmland is, in the city of Florence. It was Harold Acton's villa. It's 1 mile from the Duomo, for those of you that know Florence, on the way up to Fiesole. 55 acres, 7 villas. And we had just had a conference that the First Lady had asked me to run, which had 7 heads of state, including the President of the United States, there for 3 days, and 150 people in attendance, mostly NYU students and faculty and staff. There's never been a conference like this before. I mean, it was all thinking about, where is globalization taking the world? It was kind of a Davos, but very concentrated and very intimate, with 150 NYU people doing it. We were running it as NYU Law School. And the seven heads of state were gone. Wheels up, they call it in the trade. And I'm giving this huge party just to everybody, because you imagine how much work went into it. Just to everybody. We're now taking over the villa, we're having a big party. And a kid comes up to me and says, I understand you like baseball. He said, I don't get that. It's a really boring sport. And I channeled Charlie. I even, with his voice. And he used to have this phrase when we disappointed him with an answer. He would say, you are among the unwashed. He said, go take a shower and come back and give me a different answer, So and he could say anything to us because it was all out of love. We all knew, that this guy would run through a wall just to see us live. He always said to us, boys, students don't fail. Teachers fail. Please don't make me fail. And I say that to my students every semester now, and have for 57 years of teaching. So anyway, this young man looks at me, and I channeled Charlie. I don't know how. I said, you are among the unwashed. What you have just said is a blasphemy against all that is good in the world. If you, with your modest talent, will do a directed study under me, where you read 12 books at my direction and write 12 papers, before the year is over, you will understand baseball is a road to God. And he did. And we had fun with it. And then the next year, the word had gotten out, and there were like 200 kids out of my office. I'm waiting for this course. And I said, well, instead of doing 200 directed research, I'll teach a course in this. And young Peter here, now, all these years later, he graduated over a decade ago and had almost perfect grades. He's now married to a doctor. He's a big shot in business and everything else. But he was a student in that first class. And that whole group of them, we finished in April, and the whole group said, we don't want to end. Let's continue it over the summer. And you got to do a book out of this. And they wanted it to be a book of my stories and to be an autobiographical book. And I'm never going to write a memoir or anything that autobiographical, because I was taught, self-praise stinks. And also, you write a memoir with your story, somebody these days is going to write the other story, and who needs it, right? And they can make it up now too, So we met through the summer, and they tried various runs at getting me to write this book. But then the class kept going, and Pete Hamill, my friend I mentioned earlier, who wrote a great baseball novel, if you want to read a great baseball novel, called Snow in August, which is the intersection of Pete as a 13-year-old, a rabbi who's just come from Prague, who needs a Shabbos goy. Pete's the Shabbos goy that does the electricity on Fridays and Saturdays for the rabbi, and Jackie Robinson, all in 1947. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And you'll get that feeling of extra ecclesia nulla salus in there, because Pete was raised on that same triumphalism, where we had certain attitudes towards the other kids that were going to other schools or public schools and so forth. And we'd even throw rocks and things like that and call them names that I wouldn't repeat here. Okay? Why? Because they'd born to different parents in a different place. Different parents in a different place. That's how some people become Red Sox fans. They're just born to the wrong people in the wrong place. But in any case, yeah, please don't procreate with Red Sox fans. Yeah, it's too late. Okay. In any case, Charlie kind of set us up for the world of John the 23rd and Vatican II. My 4 years at Fordham were 4 of the 5 years of Vatican II. When I went to Fordham, one of the greatest Jesuit educators of all time, a man named Timothy Healy, was a young Jesuit priest, and his idea was I would be Fordham's first Rhodes Scholar. He had been a Rhodes Scholar. He later became the president of Georgetown and made it the place it is today. In the 1950s, Georgetown was a third-rate place. Timothy Healy changed that. In any case, Tim Healy recruited me up there to do that, but Charlie had hit me with the bug. And somehow or another, I got on a subway and went out to my sister's high school. I had been the national champion high school debater, and I rang the doorbell, and a nun came. I said, "Can I see the principal?" And she said, "Sure." And I waited in the parlor. The principal came in, and I said, "Sister, I'd like to start a high school debating team here. And I promise you, if you let me do it, the girls will win the national championship, and they'll get scholarships to college," and all kinds of stuff that was preposterous in 1961. But Charlie had taught me nothing was preposterous. And I had done it, so it couldn't be that hard. And the next 15 years of my life was devoted 100 hours a week to those girls. And they dominated high school debate, won the national championship 5 times. Every one of them went to college on the scholarship. One of them was the chairman of the board of St. Peter's College. Another just stepped down as president of Hamilton College. These are kids that wouldn't have gone to college. But I was Charlie to them. I just did what he taught me to do. I just copied him, whole heart, copied him. Of course, I was never in class. At Fordham, the Jesuits took being in class seriously. So my college grade point average was 2.1. I barely graduated. But Healy came to me in the quadrangle in my senior year, 1963. He said, "You've been a very big disappointment, a very big disappointment. But the Vatican Council is happening. It's going to be important for Catholics to understand other religions. And we're starting a PhD program in religion, the first at a Catholic university in the United States, and we'll pay you to go to school." Now, I knew I wanted to go to law school, but I hadn't done such a good job in college at this point. This guy's going to pay me to go to school. Religion's an interesting subject. Keep my mother at bay. My father had died. I'd keep my mother. How could she complain about me studying religion? So I got my PhD in religion, all while the Vatican Council was happening. And John the 23rd was saying, no. Those other religions aren't the enemy. Open the windows. Let the air in. God's mansion has many windows. Look at the world through their eyes. Don't give up your own place. We have our faith. but let's see ourselves as they see us. Let's grow together. And the great ecumenical movement started. And that kind of primed me. The combination of that and Charlie primed me for what I call a kind of secular version of ecumenism, where you look at difference in the world as one of the great gifts of the Creator. And you see the challenge as being creating a community of communities. So now I'm teaching the course, Baseball is a Road to God. And the years are going on, and Pete comes, and Doris Kern Goodwin, who's a friend, started to come because she has a great book out, if you haven't read it, called Wait Till Next Year, about being a young woman who was a Dodger fan on that day. And another friend of mine, Tom Oliphant, who has a great book called Praying for Gil Hodges, which is all about October the 4th, 1955, and how he, as a poor kid in an elite prep school in Manhattan, experienced that day, thankfully, because, and who would say these words? Tom says, thankfully, because I had scarlet fever and was home from school. And one of the rich kids in the class, knowing my family was poor, was the CEO of Sylvania, so he sent over a television. So, because I was home for weeks, and I got to watch. Everybody else was in school, but I got to watch the ball game on this small little screen with my father by my side. My father, Pete says, who had been terribly wounded psychologically by a humiliation in his life, and who sat silent for the whole game until just before Johnny Padres threw the final pitch, when he uttered one word, the only word he uttered all day long, which was the word change up. And that's exactly what Padres threw, and because it was a change up, it induced a ground ball to Pee Wee Reese, who threw it to Gil Hodges, and the world was put back in order. So they kept pushing me to write this book, Peter and Doris and Pete and Tom, and finally they hoodwinked me into doing it. And then it took me a long time for them to get to understand the title, which was Baseball as a Road to God. Many times as we would sit around the kitchen table and Peter would bring in notes from our last meeting, he would have at the top, even though he had taken the class, even though he was supposed to know what I was trying to do, he would have baseball as the road to God. I said, no, that word is probably the most important word in the book. Extra ecclesia nulla salus. We are the religion, as opposed to we were born in a certain place, and certain symbols and stories about humanity and our history bring us to a certain way of looking at the great mystery of transcendence. And we have our word, but it's a way of saying it. And that's a key pivot. So just as I wind up my prepared remarks, prepared the way jazz is prepared, as you can see, so I want to tell you the two most important words inside the book. And I'll just explain each of them to you in a paragraph. Then I'll tell you a story, and then we'll open it up, okay? So the first word, now remember, I take the study of the world's religions very, very seriously. And now, of course, when I fly over to Abu Dhabi in the morning, so on Sunday, and Sunday's the first day of the week there, it's the first day of class for the week. In the morning, my class, I limit them to 20 students. It's 20 students. NYU Abu Dhabi is the most selective school in the world right now, so they're turning down Harvard and Oxford and Bayda to come because they want to be in a unique situation. There's 20 students from 18 countries. Imagine that. Imagine the diversity of experience among them. Then I take a break for about an hour, and in the afternoon I teach another 20 students who are not NYU students. Okay, they're all local Emirati, they're all Muslim, and they're students in the colleges in that country, but they've won a national competition that lets them take a course at NYU that they get credit for in their university, and that's my course. The course, by the way, for both groups of students has the same syllabus. It's a course I teach in New York, and it's on the relationship of religion and government. Okay. So it's a very interesting conversation about religion, and I take the study of religion seriously. If you want to read one author that will give you the general approach I'm now going to give you in this word. It's the great scholar Mircea Eliade, Elliade. The first word I would say is ineffable. 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 So the great Jewish mystic Heschel speaks about knowledge and the way we know things. And he says there are three categories of knowledge. There is the known, okay, the great repository that's held in great research universities like NYU and Harvard and Oxford and Beida. This is all that we've known up to this point. Then there's the knowable but not yet known. That's what the research agenda is about, expanding the scope of knowledge. But it will come to be known, and with each passing decade, and now with each passing week, there are vast amounts of additional stuff moved from 2 to 1. But there's a third category that's frequently ignored, certainly in this time and certainly in this country, and that is the ineffable. That which cannot be put into our cognitive categories, that which cannot be put into words, that which you reduce the moment you try to articulate it with the limits of our vocabulary. And all of the great theological religions of the world, and even the ones that don't have formal theologies in their experiential part, have this concept that the real truth, the essence of the deity or the experience, wherever they are on that spectrum, is ineffable. It cannot be expressed in our words. So there are 100 names of Allah, but 99 have words, and then there's the one that is, or Yahweh's name is not to be spoken, or the Christian mystics, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila. We all understand that doctrine is reductionist. It's the best attempt you can do at taking something which inherently, most notably the Trinity, right? We call it a mystery because it's ineffable. So the real core of religion, because that's the first thing. The students in the course, it's a very, very hard course. I'm proud that most of my students report that my courses are the most demanding by a good margin of any courses that they take. So for the course Baseball is a Road to God, they read 1 or 2 books a week, not chapters of books, 1 or 2 books. One is usually a novel, and one is on the nature of religion. So Eliade or Rudolf Otto or William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, books like that. And the question every week, they have to write a paper every week. And the paper every week, it's about 8 pages, answers the question, are you seeing something you would label religion in the novel you've read? And how is your notion of the idea of religion evolving as you read these novels? And they're all novels that have baseball as their unifying theme, like Pete's novel, for example. So they're learning the ineffability of the essence of religion. And then the other word that probably is less familiar to you is the word hierophany. Hierophany. Now, if you are at St. Peter's, I trust they still require 4 years of Greek for graduation, as they did at Brooklyn Prep. You're nodding your head yes. Are you a Greek student? You didn't hear it right. You don't hear English? What, they're giving you Latin? You have to take Latin. Are you a St. Peter's student, or do you go to some brother's school?
No.
You're a St. Peter's student? What's your name?
Brendan Walsh.
Brendan. Now you can't have the name Brendan Walsh and be at St. Peter's and not understand Andra Moyena Pemusa Palutrapan Has Malapala Epi Troye CRS Toliethrana Persa. What language was that?
Sounds like Greek.
Greek, that's my boy. Okay. As opposed to Armaverum Quakano Troye Quiprimus of Horace, which is I let him right through. Yes, Virgil, that's right. That's exactly right. The first words of the Aeneid. Brass figurine with bronze oak leaf palm for you. So in any case, the word hierophany, Brendan could tell you, comes from the Greek phanos, shine through, hieros, sacred, sacred shining through. And when Eliade defines, what is the sacred, and what is the profane. In his greatest book, which is The Sacred and the Profane, he says the sacred is that which is not profane, and the profane is that which is not sacred. In other words, these categories are utterly subjective. So just think Uluru, U-L-U-R-U, Uluru, called by the English conquerors Ayers Rock, A-Y-R-E-S. Have you been to Australia? Boys, play another octave of the piano, right? But don't go to Australia and stay in Sydney. Get out into the outback. Do you know, Brendan, that the healthiest camels in the world are in Australia? You didn't know that, right? Nobody knows that. The healthiest camels in the world. Because the British in 1791, when they sent their criminals in the 11 boats, and they arrived on a continent which had the longest lasting continuous civilization in the world. 100,000 years of continuous civilization in 16 language groups that didn't see themselves as separate, as sovereigns, didn't war with each other, had a culture of sharing and welcoming the stranger. So they had this vast land to share. And the British arrive in 1791 and they bring with them concepts of property. And some native Australian is coming along and he sees a cow and he's hungry and his family's hungry and he slaughters the cow and somebody's shooting at him all of a sudden saying, "That's my cow." He says, "What's this? What is this word my?" So the British call it Ayers Rock. You're going to go home tonight and Google Uluru and you'll recognize it probably. This about 15-story high, about half a mile in diameter, orange mound that arises out of the outback where those camels are, because it's the roughest land in the world. And the British horses died, so they imported Afghani camels. And then finally, when they built roads and could get around in their horses and carriages and so forth, they released the camels. And it's camel heaven because there are no predators out there in the outback. So they're today the healthiest camels in the world. There are 1 million camels in Australia. And yet we think of them as, we think of kangaroos and koalas, right? But in any case, Uluru. Now I'm there with my son and daughter, following Charlie's mandate, right? And we're hiking, we're on a 2-day hike, and suddenly it appears, you know, when something that big appears first on the horizon and we're coming up to it. Now think of this, and here's the word hierophany. I'm looking at it and it's beautiful, and I see it as a wonderful manifestation of the miracle of nature. My native Australian guide sees it as axis mundi, the place where the planes connect, the most sacred place in the world. Meanwhile, if I were, I'm not, but if I were a priest, and I had brought with me hosts and wine, and this was such an experience, I wanted my family to celebrate the Eucharist, to celebrate the God that created this world, and I took it out and I said the words of consecration and we consumed the wine and consumed the host, our native Australian guide would think we were having lunch. So our hierophany was not his hierophany, but both connected us with this other plane. And moments like that happen in baseball. And most of all, what baseball does is by bringing us, so I'm not claiming, by the way, I could never convince you, if you were a Buddhist, by arguments to accept my hierophanies and my ineffable over yours. Okay? Those kind of arguments are futile attempts at reductionism. No more than you could convince a Red Sox fan to become a Yankee fan. Okay? It just doesn't happen. It would be good if we realized some of the phenomena that I'm developing to you, so we stop killing people over it. I love a moment in my religion and government class with my local Emirati students. We've just finished reading, they read unedited Supreme Court cases, and we just have finished reading the Supreme Court decision that says it's okay for the government, even though there's a doctrine of separation of church and state, to give textbooks to kids that are going to religious schools. And Justice Douglas writes a dissent, and he says, no, 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 no. We said it was okay to give them bus transportation, but a textbook is not a bus transportation. A textbook depends on in what teacher's hands it is. And it makes a difference. And in the example he uses in his opinion, well, who were the good guys when Cortez invaded the Incas? It depends on which side you're looking at it. And at that point, I look at my students, 20 Muslims right in front of me, and I say, you know, because they know I used to teach the Quran at St. Francis College in Brooklyn, so they know I know about their religion, but we joke about it. I say, you know, I'm going to bring up an example that's like Douglas's example. I don't know if you've heard about it or not. It's a real big thing in the West. It was called the Crusades. They look at me and I said, who were the good guys in the Crusades? I mean, that's the question that the knight is asking in Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal. We were sent off to war, and here I am playing chess with death. Who are the good guys? And you know, never do my students feel that I'm forcing an answer on them any more than I would force them to be Yankee fans or Dodger fans or Red Sox fans or even Toronto Blue Jay fans. The question, I want them to see what my two 12-year-old granddaughters saw this past March when they went with me to live in a valley with a group of villagers in Papua New Guinea who did not know there's a Europe, with whom not even our guides could converse, because our guides were from a different valley. And there's a reason Papua New Guinea is the most isolated place in the world. And we played games, all the communication was nonverbal, and we played games with these kids, and we talked. Now, we're clearly smart kids there who will never for one day in their lives meet a teacher. Not for one day. And as we sat in the airport in Hong Kong, I said to my two granddaughters, the one thing I want you to have gotten out of this trip is how much depends on where you're born and to whom. And so many of our beliefs flow from that too. And damn it, we should just stop killing each other over them. You know, when we were growing up, it was the Irish and the Italians and the Jews, and now it's got more complicated. But it didn't make sense to throw rocks at each other then, and it doesn't make any sense to throw rocks at each other now. With that, Peter, you know, here's your moment. Okay, go. When you come back from the men's room, go, please. You're married to a doctor. I don't want to be responsible. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's now open it up for questions. Peter's going to read you 2 paragraphs from the book, the last 2 paragraphs from the book, which will sum it up. But we can do that when he comes back. So thank you very much for listening. And so as it turns out, it was all a big answer to the question of whether or not Danny Berrigan was right when he wrote Extra Ecclesia Nulla Salus. I don't think I say that in the book, but anyway, questions, comments? Say who you are, too, which means you have to say what your team is.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm Azra. My son graduated from St. Peter's Prep last year. So I went from being a single mother to one with 2,500 sister wives and husband. It was the greatest thing that happened to me. But I was born in Germany in Dachau at a concentration camp hospital, long after the war. I'm not that old. And I grew up in Canada. And growing up in Canada as a little girl, I was hoping to share this with him, but we were fascinated with 3 things about America. One was the Partridge Family and taco stands, because we didn't know what that was, the Partridge Family or taco stands. We didn't know why you only had $1 bills, because all the money we saw on television was green, and in Canada only our $1 bills are green. And baseball. And so every weekend we started to play baseball based on what we would see on the Brady Bunch and other things. We'd never seen a game, there was no televised games. And then when I moved to America, I was fortunate enough to meet one of the greatest athletes in the world, Wayne Gretzky, and I said to him out of nervousness, because I didn't know what else to say, you know, what's it like being the greatest athlete in the world? And he said, I wouldn't know, I don't play baseball. and he was right. So my question to you, based on all of that, is, do you find that baseball universally, I've seen families divided at weddings over Yankee fans sit here, Red Sox fans sit here. That was in my own family. We're divorced, as I said. But do you find that baseball universally brings people together in a way that religion and government doesn't in your travels?
So the short answer is no, although your question is very revealing if you think about it, right? So if we begin talking and we turn out both to have been Dodger fans, even though Father Tony and I met for the first time tonight, we immediately bond. And Dodger fans, especially, fans of that period, that golden period from 1941 to 1957, there's immediately a bond, even if you've never talked about anything else. But this is the mystery of the early ecumenical movement in religion, that as some groups came together, those groups together grew farther apart from other groups from which they were moving, so to speak, you see. So it's very revealing that it brings together a micro group, but doesn't bring together those tables from the Red Sox fans to the Yankee fans. And of course, the mystery that Father Teilhard de Chardin, the great Jesuit philosopher, teaches us is, how do we accept that diversity and those different places to be? This was the lesson of John the 23rd, in my view. How do we accept that and create greater unity in the whole that operates, say like the elements of a great watch, where all of the elements are identifiable, but they interlock and create a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. Teilhard de Chardin would call that point omega. He would say we saw a glimpse of what it could be, because he was bringing the doctrine of evolution together with human progress. In his case, theologically. I think you can make exactly the same argument, that's what my new book is about, on the secular sense, about politics. The great challenge to humankind right now is, are we going to divide into teams and allow nativism to take over, or are we going to interlock in a secular ecumenical movement where we rejoice in difference and create a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts? Teilhard said Christ was the first man who became God in this evolutionary spiral. He showed us what complete, total, abnegating love could be. Not a moment of selflessness. And that's what we should be aiming for. So baseball itself is nothing but a metaphor for me for what goes on. That's why I was insistent on being a road to God. It turns out it does develop exactly what it's attacked for. It is what I think is its strength, and that is that it develops a capacity to see detail. The real baseball fan knows not to watch the ball, but to watch the players. The real baseball fan knows the real action occurs between pitches. Is the runner going to go? Is it going to bunt? What pitch is going to be thrown? Should you be playing in or out? These are the conversations. There's a lot to observe in great detail, which is the same reason that every time somebody in our family becomes 12, I'd love to say to you they get confirmed. They don't, because Lisa and I raised all our children and grandchildren Jewish. So my Irish Catholic brother-in-law, my sister's husband, says, not since Abraham of Ur has a Gentile begat as many Jews as John. But so they're not confirmed. They're bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah or whatever. But the real rite of passage in the Sexton family is 9 days on the river in the Grand Canyon, and seeing the wonder of the magnitude of nature and the tininess of the life that can survive in a desert like that. So baseball cultivates the same thing that the Grand Canyon does, you see? and in a Charlie-like move with my kids, which is very consistent with what I say in the book. The secret to life is understanding that New York and the Grand Canyon are the same thing. They're just two aspects of the same creation. So baseball develops capacities if you pay attention to it, but so does Buddhism, so does Judaism, so does Islam, so does Christianity, and so forth. And the book is really a long argument against triumphalism. That's what the essence, which is why I was so objecting to their use of the word "the" rather than "a." Before you do a question, I want Peter to just read his favorite 2 paragraphs in the book, okay? So I'll hold the mic for you, Peter. This is a Canadian accent.
2 in a row. This book, in the end, is simply a vehicle to tell some stories that reveal a love of baseball. And in some of the stories, display the joy of a spiritual life. And maybe it shows that it is possible, even for a committed intellectual, to embrace both. It is, in theologian Paul Tillich's words, to convince some readers of the hidden power of faith within themselves and of the infinite significance of that to which faith is related.
Who's next? Scott? Yes. You want the mic? Take it. Ready? Can you catch?
I can talk.
No, I know you can talk.
Okay.
Oh, he can talk.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sexton. John, I got to ask you the question. Big Brooklyn Dodger fan with a Yankee cap? I guess it's duality of life, maybe? Or I'm just curious how and why you wore the Yankee cap. I'm a big Yankee fan, by the way. No, that's a prep.
So my best friend Dougie and I were the only 2 Dodger fans in our neighborhood. And as the World Series approached each year, the guys, which the young people in the audience may know from the movie or the play, the musical Grease, right? So these black leather jacket guys, you know, who had names like Boggiano, and like Louis Boggiano had been left back, I think, into the 8th grade. He was 18 with us when he was there, you know, but because they would leave people back, you know, so in any case, they would get us against that, you know, those chain fences in the playground, and they'd say, okay, admit it. Rizzuto's better than Reese, you know, Mantle's better than, and we were like the Christian martyrs, and we would, you know, and they would beat the crap out of us each year. It was like a ritual. But you know, when I had 2 years out of my 28 years as dean and president, when the faculty was, not to its credit, but it was pummeling me, you know, and at one of the town halls with faculty, one of them stood up and said, "When will we inflict enough pain on you that you will capitulate?" And I looked at her and I said, "Rebecca, you got a bad break here. You got a kid that was taught as a youngster that crucifixion in a good cause was a worthy life." So just keep bringing it on. You know, you're just getting me through purgatory, Rebecca. And of course, you can imagine how this works at a secular university. You know, they oh my God, you know, he's worse than we thought. You know, so anyway, yeah. So it was real deep, right? So now 1969 comes. They've left. My son is born. And I know that, more important than the religion I'm going to give him is the teams for which he's going to root. Because the religion thing, he may reconsider and change. That's going to be out of my control. But he's never going to reconsider the teams. You know, whatever I give him, that's his for life. The poor kid, I gave him the Jets. I brought him home. I mean, he was born the day they won the Super Bowl. I said, you know, he's lived his entire life, you know, waiting for the second shoe to fall, you know. So I couldn't, I couldn't give him the Dodgers because they were away, right? And they were apostates, right? Even though they had some great names. So it was a choice between the Mets and the Yankees, and I really thought this out seriously. I mean, and by the way, the story I'm telling you, which is the chapter on conversion in the book. So the book has of course it has 9 innings, and has a pre-game show and a post-game show and a 7th inning stretch. So there are 12 units. And there's a unit on conversion, which you might get some laughs out of reading. But I'm saying it. So I'm really thinking this out, and you know, the Mets were having their miracle year. The Yankees were mired in last place. The biggest thing that happened to the Yankees that season, their best player was a guy named Roy White, you know, who was the only player to hit over 300, like in a 5-year period on the team. And his second baseman named Horace Clark was a decent player. And Gene Michael, this is the biggest thing that happened in the 1969 season for the last place Yankees. Twice he perpetrated the hidden ball trick on second base. Twice. You know, so he became famous this year when a Yankee got caught off second base, right? So I'm saying, gee, if, you know, so that made the Yankees plausible, because they weren't the Yankees of Louis Boggiano. And the Mets were kind of novo. And I'm saying, you know, I'm a 50s Catholic. The monuments, the saints, look what I'd be giving the kid, you know, Ruth and Garrick and, you know. So that was the decision I made. But I remained a closet Dodger fan because I could still get the box scores from the West Coast. And then came the moment when the Dodgers and Yankees played in the World Series. And that was when I had to decide, was I going to root against my son's team? And I said, no way. So I made the transition, and then of course we were sent into the desert through the Winfield and Mattingly years. You know, so it was like a retribution. God was saying, you know, okay, you did it now, you know, but it ended up pretty good, and it looks like it's going from here. Anyway, one more question, Father, if somebody has one, and then we'll stop. One more. Ready?
So a lot of your book deals with doubt and suffering. So how many, my question is, are the Cub fans, are the Red Sox fans, are those that suffer the most, in a sense, have a better understanding of Christianity because they've suffered and takes longer to get to the promised land?
So your name is what?
Bill.
Bill. So, you know, Bill, it's really interesting where your questions have kind of picked up on the themes of the book, because the chapters in the book are things like, it starts off with the easy stuff that many books have been written about, but I didn't want to write another one of these books that says a baseball stadium's a cathedral. You know, I wanted to use this on this big issue that I've talked with you about tonight. Once we get going, after we do sacred place and sacred time, then we go into faith, doubt, and conversion are the next 3 chapters. And then we go into saints and sinners and blessings and curses. So you're really getting the sense for it. So I'm just going to give you a quick synopsis of what is one of my favorite chapters, which is the blessings and curses chapter. So you know, I would insist, and this would drive Peter crazy, because he would be there with his tape machine, and he'd go home and he'd organize what I had said and bring it back, and he thought the chapter was done. I said, no, we're just starting. You have to narrow the focus if you're going to be talking significantly theologically, because I wanted to make points about the structural similarity, about, you know, the inside of a religion. So I'm teaching the reader about what the nature of religion at the same time as telling some good baseball stories. So I said, we got to figure out what we mean by this word blessing and the word curse in this chapter, because they're used very casually. And Mariano Rivera had just said, I thank God, because, you know, he's a religious person and a minister and so forth. He said, I thank God for the blessings of my pitching. We're not talking about blessings in that sense. I said, in this chapter, we're going to talk about blessing as kind of the moment of ecstatic, orgasmic joy that follows when you're released from deep accursedness. So we're going to want to examine the great curses in baseball, and then the blessing, that ecstatic moment that it comes. So the first one I start with is the Dodgers, of course, and how they came to be known lovingly as the Bums, because there was always, starting with Mickey Owens' passed ball in the 1941 World Series, they always were there, and they never made it. But the good people that were the Dodger fans, this comes to the tribal thing, how did they respond to this curse? With the great virtue of hope. Wait till next year. They never got down on their team. Wait till next year. It was always hope. Lord knows we need that right now, right? So that was the great people of Brooklyn. Then I pivot to the Red Sox. 1908. I said, they didn't even come up with the idea that they were cursed until 1972 when a sports writer named Shaughnessy. They were just too inured and numb to human life and experience, this racist, sexist community that my brother-in-law, who's a Boston Red Sox fan, who as a United States ambassador had a Red Sox pennant behind his desk in the United States Embassy, said, you wrote the whole damn book for those pages. I know it. You know, so I said, how did they respond? How did they respond once Shaughnessy had them cursed? By whining and with one of the 7 cardinal sins, despair. Such that in 2004, when finally, because the Yankees decided, let them have it, so they, I mean, look, we had our feet on their throat. It was the matter, we were there, we could have done it. We said, it was kind of a metaphor for one of those Yankee fans, Jimmy Woods, in the 8th grade, when he cold hit me from behind, and I wrestled him to the ground, and I had him down there, and I had my 2 knees on his 2 shoulders, and I said, you know what, I'm a pacifist. And I got up, and the guy hit me from behind, and an otherwise perfect nose is, to this day, a little less perfect because of that. So we let them, but it wasn't enough for them, right? No. All of a sudden, there was no moment of ecstatic joy because they were too depraved for it. It was insatiable. They turned on their own team. They started complaining against their own team, even in 2009 and on. So that's the Red Sox. Then the next great curse is the Cubs. So how did the Cub fans, longer than the Red Sox, how did they respond? Well, they responded exactly the way you would expect a community of people who call themselves the second city would respond. I mean, think about it for a minute. What did they do? Resignation. Right? They weren't as noble but they weren't as depraved as the resignation. So I quote 2 great t-shirts that actually my son and I found in Chicago. One was, what did Christ say to the Cubs before he rose into heaven? And the answer was, don't do anything till I get back. And then the other t-shirt said, anybody can have a bad century. So this is resignation. And then the 4th curse I examined is perhaps the worst of all, which was the long drought in Philadelphia. But notwithstanding the Greek name that Brendan will tell you afterwards of brotherly love that goes with the name Philadelphia, the people of Philadelphia, they never felt cursed. They just knew they had lousy teams. They were complete secularists. So that gives you a sense of the anatomy of the book. And thank you very much for being such good.
Just stay here. Just a moment, we'll also get a picture. When John was talking, it just brought back many memories for myself. Just even as a kid, talking about different groups. We played stickball on the block, and the ball would go up on the porch of some lady, and she took the ball. I called her a dirty Protestant, because that was the mentality. And then I had Father Dan Berrigan as a senior, and I was used to getting my A's, gender, number, case, accusative, ablative, absolute. I knew all that. And then he asked us to think about Aeneid and Dido, What? You know, I want my gender-numbered case. I want my A's. And he brought us down to, to Nativity Parish, and it was the first time we kind of were able to help the tutor, maybe unprivileged kids. And so you kind of just really think about that. And the other day, talking about baseball, we kind of use it. Ed Lucas, you probably know Ed Lucas, kind of blind writer for the Jersey Journal. But he, when the Yankees were still in the playoffs against, against the Astros, he said he hopes that all of those players from the past, Mantle, Berra, DiMaggio, Rizzuto, that they'll whisper into the bats of Judge and Bird, and Sanchez, and give them that spirit. So in some way, kind of baseball, in some way, kind of continues to live on. And John, just a couple of things. So you always remember Grandin Warren here, picture of, you can take a look at that. And there's a shirt, extra large, but and to help Peter, a little shirt for you,
Extra large.
Well, this is just large, all right. Sure, come on, you're in the center here,
It's all right. He'll grow into the shirt. His wife is a doctor.